Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another season preview video to discuss. We've done the first four with the first two of each division. We're going back to the Atlantic Division today. We're looking at the Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning, how their seasons finished last year, how they did this past offseason, and we'll look ahead to the 25-26 season for both teams. But to all the updates from our past couple of days, coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for reviews coming out in the very near future. So in today's video, we have another season preview video here to discuss. We're looking back at the Atlantic Division with the two Florida teams, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. So as per usual, look at how these two teams did their past offseason, look at some of their stats, look at their additions and subtractions from this past offseason, their trades, their top 3 draft picks, look at the offseason checklist I gave them in the offseason preview video, see what they met, see what they didn't, and then we'll look at their lineup, we'll look at their predictions for this upcoming season, and we'll look at their offseason grades. So we'll start with the Tampa Bay Lightning here. Last year was a pretty dang good season. I thought they would have probably taken a step back and missed the playoffs. They wound up challenging for first in the Atlantic Division and got second with a record of 47, 27, and 8 for 102 points. It was second in the Atlantic, third in the Eastern Conference, and 8th in the entire NHL, so they were a top 10 team. They were a really good team last year, scored 292 goals, which is absolutely insane, while they led in 216 goals against, which was a lot better than they did the previous season. So everything was going well for Tampa Bay Lightning. The goal scoring leaders were Brayden Point, who had 42 goals, Jake Guentzel, who had 41 goals, and Nikita Kucherov, who had 37 goals. Well, Nikita Kucherov was the team's point leader in the regular season with 121. Hagel hit the 90-point plateau with 90, which was incredible for him, and Brayden Point had an 82-point season, so their big guns were firing on all cylinders in the regular season. They entered the postseason as the second team in the Atlantic Division, wound up facing the Panthers, who were the third team in the Atlantic Division, but surprisingly, and to most people's surprises, the Panthers made short work of them, beating Tampa in only 5 games, so it was a very short series there between Tampa and Florida, and Tampa wound up losing to the Florida Panthers, which we'll get to in a minute. So very interesting note there, but it was a short playoff exit again for the third straight year for the Tampa Bay Lightning. In the playoffs, Guentzel led the team with 3 goals, while Paul and Point were tied for second on the team with 2, and then Guentzel was also the point leader for the Tampa Bay Lightning with 6, while Kucherov and Goncalves were tied for the second on the team with 4. So once again, it wasn't overly bad. We've seen worse teams' playoff stats, but was not going to beat the Florida Panthers the way they were point producing in the playoffs. So very interesting note there, but as we just talked about, Panthers wound up ending the Bolts season in round 1, so very interesting note there. If you look at their offseason ads, they had Sam O'Reilly in a trade from Edmonton, Abruzzese and Holmberg from Toronto in free agency, Pelletier from Philly in free agency, Tkachuk in the AHL, and Simon Lundmark from Winnipeg in free agency as well, while they lost Cam Atkinson to UFA status, Ryder Korczak to UFA status, Pelletier and Glendening to UFA status, Isaac Howard in a trade to Tampa, Logan Brown to LA in free agency, and Nick Perbix in free agency to Nashville. So all in all, if you look at this team, they maybe got a little bit better, but not a whole bunch. Like they made the Howard O'Reilly swap. Like neither of those prospects are going to play for Tampa this upcoming season. So it's a decent swap. I think long term could help them. They had Abruzzese, Holmberg, Pelletier, who I think could all fill in bond 6 roles. Like they're not overly bad additions. They're just not flashy, really good improvements I think Tampa really need this offseason. I think Holmberg and Pelletier could definitely be solid like third line forwards on the Tampa Bay organization. They lost Atkinson, Brown, Pelletier, Glendening. Like those are some decent fourth liners, call-up options, spare forwards, but it's nothing that's really going to hurt this team long term. They had Simon Lundmark, who I think will add some defensive depth for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They do lose Nick Perbix, who was a pretty solid top 4 defenseman the past couple seasons in Tampa. So all in all, maybe they got a slight bit better, but they really didn't get much better or much worse this past offseason with their additions and subtractions. They made one trade this offseason, that was the Howard for O'Reilly swap with the Edmonton Oilers, a deal in which I think the Oilers do win right now, but I think long term the Bolts could benefit from. So it was an interesting trade there. Next, going over to the top 3 draft picks for the Bulls for this past season. The first pick of the 2025 draft was in the second round, 56 overall, and they took center prospect Zada, who has already signed his ELC. He seems like a really solid prospect. Could be a solid like second, third line center going forward, so pretty solid pickup there for the Bolts. Well, their second and third picks of the 2025 draft were in the 4th round, 108th and 127th overall. They also took centers. First it was center Rachianen, and then it was center Foster, who I think could eventually challenge for like 4th line center roles. So very interesting note there, the Bolts really identified a weakness on their team as a center group, and they wound up taking a whole bunch of centers with their first 3 picks in this past year's draft. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my checklist of the 5 things I said this team should do in the offseason, in my offseason preview video, and we're going to see which ones they have accomplished. So in the offseason preview video, I said that the first priority for the Bolts was to figure out the Howard situation, then consider moving McDonough and or O'Reilly, then add a top 4 defenseman, add 2 or 3 top 9 forwards, and get a backup for Andrei Vasilevsky. So the first situation was completed. They did figure out the Howard situation. Howard said just after the Bolts season ended that he didn't want to sign in Tampa, so they need to figure out some sort of situation. They move him, they get S.O'Reilly back, like I said, long term. That could be a really solid solution, and I do think that he completed that first thing on my priority list by moving Isaac Howard. The second thing I said was to move McDonough or O'Reilly to give them a little more cap space to do some more work. They didn't move either of them. It doesn't sound like they're gonna move either of them. McDonough is making over $6 million, so is O'Reilly, so I thought it might have made some sense that they move one of those 2 guys, but they didn't, and both those guys are staying, so that was not met, which was my second priority. The third priority for the Bolts that I said in my offseason preview video was to add top 4 defensemen, especially with them losing Nick Perbix. I said they really need to add a solid top 4 defenseman to sort of stabilize and strengthen the blue line. They weren't able to do that. Their biggest addition on the blue line was Simone Lundmark, who I think at best this year could be a 6-7 guy, maybe a call-up option. So they didn't really accomplish that thing on my checklist, as I really did think that this team needed to make adding a top 4 defenseman a top priority. The fourth thing I said this team should do was to add 2 or 3 top 9 forwards, and they really did that. I'm going to give them a check on my checklist for that, because they added Pelletier and Holmberg, who I think can be top 9 forwards. On the younger side of things, they have been top 9 forwards in the past in Calgary and in Toronto, and I do think going forward with a little bit of a weaker forward group for the Tampa Bay Lightning, I do think those 2 could be really solid pickups there for Tampa. So I do think that they completed that point in my checklist by adding 2 top 9 forwards. And the fifth thing I said this team needs to do is to add a backup for Vasilevsky. Now, they did that to some extent. They re-signed Jonas Johansson. He will continue to be the backup for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I was expecting them to go out in the free agent market and maybe add a little bit more of a suitable veteran who can be a solid guy like a Samsonov or a Reimer, but they wound up sticking with Johansson, which I think is a little bit surprising, but to some extent did complete what I was saying on my checklist. So I guess in some ways that's a win, but maybe not in some other ways. So very interesting note there. But I definitely do think they completed 2 things for sure on my checklist, which was move on from Isaac Howard and his situation, and they had 2 top 9 forwards. So they did at least some things on my checklist. Next, going over to the team's lineup for the 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, my projected lineup for the Tampa Bay Lightning is as follows. The top line is Jake Gensel with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov. The second line is Brennan Hagel with Anthony Thorelli and Oliver Bjorkstrand. The third line is Connor Geekie, Nick Paul, and Jacob Pelletier. And the fourth line is Chafee with Gord and Holmberg. It's a decent forward group, but not one of the best that Tampa's had in recent memory. The defensive units are Hedman playing with Radish, McDonough playing with Chernak, and then Lilleberg playing with Moser. Vasilevsky's the starter, Johansson is the backup, and then Goncalves, Girgensons, and Lundmark are the 3 spares. And that would be a decent roster there for Tampa. The defense is lacking a little bit. The forward depth is lacking a little bit. Goaltending-wise, not the best in the world. So once again, it's not the greatest of lineups, but it's a decent lineup there for Tampa. Next, going over to my predictions for the Tampa Bay Lightning for this upcoming 25-26 season. So at this current point in time, I do have them once again in my predictions taking a step back. Not as much as I had them expecting to take a step back last year. I think they're going to be still in the hunt for a playoff spot. We're not be one bit surprised that they were able to squeak into a wild card position. But at this current point in time, I have them missing out by just a handful of points, like 2 or 3 points. I have them finishing with a record of 42, 36, and 4 for 88 points, which would be 11th in the Eastern Conference. So I have just a couple of teams, a couple of points ahead of them. I think they have them missing the playoffs like a 4 or 5 points. Like, they're going to be very close to a playoff spot, in my opinion. They're not going to miss out by much, but I just don't think Tampa had a good enough offseason to remain in a playoff spot. Once again, bet against Tampa at your own peril. I get that, but I just think Tampa is poised to take a little bit of a step back this year and miss the playoffs. So that's my predictions for Tampa Bay Lightning for this upcoming season. And lastly, going over to my offseason grade. Now, if you look at their additions in and subtractions, I don't think you can really say they either got a whole bunch better or they got a whole bunch worse. I think the biggest problem was on the blue line. The loss of Perbix, I think, will really hurt them. I think the loss of Howard and what he could have potentially brought them, especially this upcoming season, is going to really hurt them. I do think Pelletier and Holmberg can cover up some of the losses on the forward group. I just don't think they got a whole bunch better. So I'm giving them a C- rating for this past offseason. I don't think they did a horrible offseason, and I do think that they're not a whole bunch different than last year. I just don't think they're a whole bunch better either. So I have their offseason grades being a C-. That's my thoughts on Tampa as it sits right now. Next, going over to the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. So the Florida Panthers last year, regular season-wise, didn't have an overly great regular season. They had a record of 47, 31, and 4 for 98 points. They didn't even hit the triple-digit mark. They finished third in the Atlantic Division, just a couple of points behind Tampa, fifth in the Eastern Conference, and 11th in the NHL. So once again, it wasn't a bad season from Florida by any means, but to not hit the triple-digit mark was a little bit of a sour point there for Florida. They had 246 goals for, 223 goals against in the regular season, which not too bad, plus 23. It's nowhere near Tampa's plus 70 something, but it's a lot better than teams like Montreal who made it a minus rating. So once again, not the worst in the world, but not the best either. Points-wise in the regular season, Sam Reinhart had 81 points, led the team in points, followed by Barkov who had 71 and Matthew Tkachuk who had 57. So only two players hit 60 plus points. It's a little bit concerning with their depths last year for Florida. Well, goal scoring wise, Reinhart had 39 goals, Bennett had 25 goals, and Tkachuk had 22 goals. So at least a couple of guys hit the 20 plus mark, but only one guy hit 30 plus, and Reinhart almost had another 40 goal season. So very interesting note there. It was a really interesting regular season from the Panthers, but when it came to playoff time, they were shot out of a cannon. Completely surprised a whole bunch of people by taking down the Tampa Bay Lightning in only 5 games in round 1. In round 2, after falling down 2-0 in the series, they stormed back, beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 7 games. In round 3 in the conference final, took down the Carolina Hurricanes with ease in 5 games. And then after a really interesting game 1 in Edmonton, they would sort of take over that series, and Florida would dominate, winning the Stanley Cup in 6 games over the Edmonton Oilers. So once again, it's not the best of playoff runs in the world, but for the Panthers team, who was 11th in the NHL in the regular season, they didn't even hit the triple-digit point mark. They ended up winning the Cup and are back-to-back champions. So very interesting note there. Vraggy, Reinhart, Tkachuk were tied for a team lead in points with 23 in the postseason, while Conn Smythe winner Sam Bennett led the team with 15 goals in the postseason, and Sam Reinhart had 11. So very interesting note there. But the Panthers were a dominant powerhouse in the playoffs, leading to their second straight Stanley Cup victory. So very interesting note there. Now going over to their offseason additions and subtractions. So if you look at this team and their additions and their subtractions, they did lose a little bit more than they added, but they were able to keep a whole bunch of key pieces around. Like they signed Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad. A lot of people thought at least 2 of those guys would leave. All 3 stayed before free agency, so that was great work there from Florida, and it's a win in and of itself. If you look at their additions though, they had Nolan Foote for New Jersey, Jack Stanichka from Los Angeles, Luke Kunin from Columbus, Jeff Petrie from Detroit, Brendan Busey from Boston, Tarasov in a trade from Columbus, as well as a 2026 second and 2027 sixth round pick of the Washington Capitals, where they lost Nico Sturm to Minnesota, Justin Sourdough in a trade to Washington, Zach Dalpe, who retired, Issy Puljujärvi, who's a UFA, Nate Schmidt to Utah, Vitek Vanecek to Utah, Matt Kiersted to Minnesota, Kaapo Kähkönen to Montreal, and a 2025 fifth round pick, Florida's, to Columbus in the Daniel Tarasov deal. So all in all, I think I could say they did lose a little bit of depth. Like they add Petrie, but they lose Kiersted and Schmidt on the blue line. Schmidt was a really solid third pair defenseman. I think they're hoping Petrie can be the same, but still, at this point in time, Schmidt's a little bit younger than Petrie, so I still think that's a little bit of a downgrade. Goaltending wise, you got a whole bunch younger. You go from Vanecek and Kähkönen to Busey and Tarasov as your 2-3. I think longer term, that could be really solid moves there from the Florida Panthers, and I think Tarasov could be a breakout candidate this upcoming season for the Panthers. Forward wise, they did lose a little bit of depth. Puljujärvi, Dalpe, Schmidt, and Sturm, but they had Foote, Kunin, Stanichka. Kunin, I think, is going to be a solid bottom 6 guy, sort of a guy to replace a guy like Nico Sturm. While Foote and Stanichka will be call-up options. I could see Foote even make the NHL roster, while Sourdough, Dalpe, Puljujärvi were all depth guys anyways. So like, all in all, they were able to keep Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad, and didn't lose a whole bunch of depth as well. Like, all in all, beautiful offseason there from the Florida Panthers. The Panthers made 2 trades this offseason, trading 5th round pick in 2025 to Columbus for Tarasov, and trading Sourdiff, and what I think was the steal of the season, to the Washington Capitals for a 2026 2nd round pick and 2027 6th round pick, and Sourdiff at this point is an AHL level guy. So I think that was a really solid trade there from the Panthers. Their top 3 draft picks in their 2025 draft, their first draft pick in 2025 was in the 4th round, so they didn't have a pick in any of the first 3 rounds, which is not surprising given they won the Stanley Cup. They had 112th overall. They took left winger Clivo. They also had another 4th round pick, 128th overall. They took left winger Bush, and then 5th round pick, 129th overall. So they had back-to-back picks. They're now taking right winger Moses. So very interesting note there. Like, I think all 3 of those guys are not guaranteed to at the NHL level be solid players, but I think eventually, if their career development goes well, any one of those 3 could wind up challenging for like bottom 6 roles in the Panthers organization. So once again, this team didn't have a whole bunch of really top level picks for its upcoming draft. So in the 2025 draft, they had a couple of really solid value picks in the later rounds. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the 5 things I said this team should do in the offseason preview video with my offseason checklist. So the first thing I said this team should do was to extend 2 of Bennett, Marchand, or Ekblad. The second one was to find a backup for Bobrovsky. The third one was to sign 1 or 2 top 9 forwards. The fourth one was to consider moving Rodriguez and or Lundell. And the fifth one was to add 2 to 3 third pair depth defensemen. So if you look at what they did this offseason, they not only topped my top priority of signing Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad, but they on top of that signed all 3 of them. Marchand, Bennett, Ekblad, all brought back from Florida. So my top priority was not only met, but exceeded in my offseason preview video, which I think was a great move there from Florida. The second thing that this team did was to find a backup for Bobrovsky. After acquiring him at the trade deadline, Vanecek was basically Bobrovsky's backup throughout the entire season. Knight started the season as the backup, but eventually was traded for Seth Jones. So they needed a new backup with Vanecek hitting UFA status. Tarasov, I think, can be that guy. He didn't have a great season last year in Columbus, but I think has the potential to be a solid, at least 1B goaltender. So that was a pretty solid pickup there for Florida. The third thing and the fourth thing on my checklist they did not do. The third thing was to sign 1 to 2 top 9 forwards. Their biggest forward addition was signing Luke Kunin. So not really any sort of guys who are going to play top 9 minutes, but keeping guys like Bennett and Marchand really doesn't need any top 9 forwards. So they didn't accomplish adding 1 to 2 top 9 forwards, but they did sign Marchand. So I guess you could say that was their top 9 addition. So that's a possibility. And then the fourth thing on my checklist was to consider moving Rodriguez and or Lundell. They didn't do that. They didn't need to do that. Kachuk actually missed the first few months of the season, so they're going to be cap compliant. I said that was the intent of them needing to move off caps, and they might still eventually need to do that, but at this point in time, they didn't do that thing on my checklist, which was to move off one of Rodriguez or Lundell. And the fifth thing I said this team was to do is to add 2 to 3 depth defensemen or third pair defensemen. They added 1, which was Jeff Petrie, who I think will be a solid third pair defenseman for this upcoming season, but I did want to see him add a little bit more, so you can say they kind of checked that one off, but just not to the extent I thought they would do that. So very interesting note there. But the top 2 priorities in my opinion, which was find a backup for Bobrovsky and at least sign 2 of those big 3 UFAs, they did wind up accomplishing, which was great stuff there from Florida. Next, going over to the team's lineup for this upcoming season. So that's current point in time, my projected lineup for the 25-26 season for Florida. First line is Verhaeghe playing with Barkov and Reinhart. Second line is Rodriguez playing with Bennett and Samoskevich. Third line is Luostarinen playing with Lundell and Marchand. And fourth line is Boqvist with Kunin and Nosek. The D pairs are Forsling with Ekblad, Mikkola with Jones, and Kulikov with Petrie. Bobrovsky's the starter, Tarasov's the backup, and Gadjevich, Greer, and Belinskas are the 3 spares, with Kachuk obviously starting on long-term injury reserve. So that would be a decent lineup. Like, it's not as deep as the Florida Panthers team from last year without Kachuk, but still, it's a really solid lineup there for the Florida Panthers. Next, going over to my predictions for the Florida Panthers for this upcoming season. Now, I have the Florida Panthers taking 8 ever so slightly step forward. I do think keeping around those guys long term will wind up hurting them, but I think for this upcoming season they'll probably keep them better. Like, you got Marchand for an entire season. Sure, you're gonna lose Kachuk for a little bit, but like, that team is still one heck of a team. So I have them finishing with a record of 48, 26, and 8 for 104 points, second in the Atlantic Division. So I have them moving up 1 spot in the Atlantic Division, moving up 6 spots from where they finished last year. So they will wind up hitting the triple-digit mark this upcoming season. I think they're going to be in a really tall Atlantic Division, but I do think think with keeping guys like Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad instead of letting them go in free agency, they do wind up keeping this team together. I think they'll have another really solid regular season next year. So that's my predictions for the Florida Panthers. And lastly, going over to their offseason grade. Now, their additions, subtractions, you can say they maybe got a tiny bit worse with their depth loss. They got a little bit better on the forward group. But I do think keeping Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad really did win the offseason for the Florida Panthers. So I have them having a B rating. Like, I think, honestly, this team had a really solid offseason, basically because they kept Marchand, Ekblad, and Bennett. But still, they have a couple of really solid young goaltenders now. Petrie can replace Schmidt. They have a couple of decent forward depth with their additions of guys like Foot and Kunin. So all in all, I think they did really solid this offseason, and I'm going to give them a B rating. So that's my opinion on the Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning as of right now. So definitely let your thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What are your opinions of the Panthers and the Bolts? Do you think the Panthers are going to take another step forward this upcoming season, be second in the Atlantic Division? Do you think Tampa's poised to make a step back, maybe miss the playoffs this year? Definitely have to get thoughts on all that. What do you think is going to happen this upcoming season? How do you think they did this offseason? Definitely have thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're like to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming in the very near future. Also the blog, comment news, rumors, analysis, and for that, so check that out. If you want to in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.